Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. My name is Bryce, and I just wanted to get on here and share a little bit about my recent seizure. I had a little bit less than 2 months ago, and so many of you know, my friends and family, and those of you who might follow some of these little videos that I make from time to time. I just love to be vulnerable and authentic and share my heart, what I feel like God is speaking to me kind of through the seasons of my life. Something really big and significant happened, life changing, happened to me, to my family, my wife and kids specifically, who found my unconscious body after a extended, it's called a status epilepticus seizure, tonic clonic, which is full body, full contortion, body jerking. Um, so I just wanted to share what happened fully and kind of a little bit more of my medical history, and kind of the hints that lead us to the cause of this seizure, which we don't really have a concrete answer as to why this happened when it happened, kind of what seemingly so out of the blue. But many of you may know that when I was 11, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor in my left occipital lobe, which affected my eyesight, my vision, and one of the biggest side effects I had was seizures. And I had lots and lots of seizures, many while I was asleep. I remember we did I believe it was an EKG test where they hook up the wires and everything, and they had me stay the night at the hospital, and I had like 30 some seizures in the night. And this was while I had the brain tumor. It affected my vision. I had very intense headaches and migraine headaches. I vomited a lot. I had blurry vision. I had audio and visual hallucinations. So it was a very intense, traumatic time when I had the brain tumor. Now, when I was 12, so about a year after the diagnosis, I had brain surgery and I had the tumor fully resected out of that back left side of my head. When my hair is short enough, you can see a pretty gnarly scar right there. And so even after the surgery, I still had headaches and migraines, and I even had some seizures after the surgery, which the doctor said, that was likely to happen and that it would probably take some time for all of the symptoms to go away. But over time, over the next year and a half or so, the seizures stopped, the headaches stopped, and I healed quite nicely. They said I was having MRIs done pretty much every year. And over time, as I got better, the care it seemed that I just didn't need the same care as what I was having during that first year and a half or so. So we slowed down on the MRIs. I wasn't on any medication. Now, that is just one kind of fraction of my story, and it's a lot more complicated. During that time, there was a lot going on. My younger brother and I, we moved a lot. We were born in Ohio. We moved to New York when we were really young with my mom, who had divorced my dad and left, and we moved many, many times. My brother and I lived in foster care for some time, and we lived with some friends while my mom was seeking mental health care for herself, and our father wasn't really in the picture. So much there that like I can't really unpack right now, but because there's no really genetic history of brain tumors in my family that we know of, Like, doctors couldn't really put a pin on why I developed this brain tumor. And pediatric tumors are just like a whole nother field. Like, it's a whole nother just area or compartment of tumors in general. Pediatric tumors, they just behave differently, and usually there's a lot of different causes for pediatric tumors from what I was kind of made aware by our neurologist at Duke. And likely it could have been stress. Like, it could have been like childhood trauma, and I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder at a pretty young age. And just, we went through a lot, and that the tumor in itself was just very traumatic as well. But thankfully, I recovered, and I did so well afterwards, not having seizures that we know of. Now, kind of looking back at this whole thing, after having this very severe seizure, under 2 months ago, now we're re-examining, okay, like, the way that my neurologist said it, I really like how she said, there's always going to be that scar tissue in my brain from where I had the tumor, where I had the surgery. Literally, there's a hole in my brain. Like, you can see it on the MRI. You can see the hole. It's about 2 inches in diameter, and like she said, it's like a hot coal. And really, any time, if the wind blows on it just right, like, it could start a fire. And whether that kind of wind or disruptions is caused by stress, or just busyness or health, lack of sleep, bad nutrition, whatever, like, it could be a number or a combination of things. I'm always going to be at risk of having a seizure or the symptoms that I had while I had the tumor, just because of that scar tissue and that literal hole in my brain. So I should have been keeping up with the care. I should have been getting annual MRIs. Really, for the rest of my life, I'm going to be having an annual MRI to make sure that the tumor doesn't come back, to make sure that there's no other growths in my brain, to make sure that I'm not having any seizure activity. But I'll be on seizure medication the rest of my life after this, because this seizure, guys, it almost took my life, honestly. It was very severe, and I was unconscious, unresponsive for over 24 hours, depending on when the seizure happened in the night, which we don't know exactly when it happened. But doctors estimate that the seizure lasted at least 30 minutes. Again, which is a status epilepticus seizure, is any seizure that lasts more than 5 minutes, or you have multiple seizures that your body can't stop on its own within a 30-minute time span. So most likely I was having seizure after seizure after seizure for 30 minutes. It could have been much longer. We just don't know. My wife was in the other room. My kids were asleep. I was on the couch. I was watching my Star Wars show, and I didn't have work the next day. It was pretty normal for me to stay up a little bit later, my wife to go to bed when she was tired. So we just didn't really think anything of, I did have a little bit of a headache that night, but it was a long day at work. It was a busy week. It was closeout I'm in furniture sales, and it was just a busy week. And so I thought maybe I just had a stress headache. I don't know, but we just were totally taken by surprise by this seizure. And right away, the doctors found that I developed rhabdomyolysis, which is a muscle deteriorating condition, often diagnosed to crush victims who are in bad car accidents, earthquake victims, or older folks who fall and have such a shock to their body they may develop rhabdo. Even marathon runners or athletes that overexert themselves and overtrain can develop rhabdo. So that was giving us a hint as like the muscle contractions that I was having during the seizure were so long and prolonged and so intense that not only did I contract the rhabdomyolysis, but my CK levels, which is how they determined that I had rhabdo, that's kind of the key factor into diagnosing rhabdomyolysis for anyone is looking at the CK levels. Anything over 5,000 is considered like, that's like, okay, we know that this person has rhabdomyolysis. A lot of times their kidneys fail. My kidneys were failing. My liver was failing. The color of my urine was like, looked like sweet tea. Like literally, it was crazy. Like the toxins from your muscles are leaking into your bloodstream. So you're quite literally, you're going septic basically is what happens when you have, and it's very life-threatening. Like it's very serious if it's not treated promptly. So thankfully, you know, when my wife and children found my unconscious body that morning of May 1st, my wife saw that I was sitting in my own mess. I had vomited. My face was blue. My lips were sealed shut. I was breathing very shallow, taking very shallow breaths. Right away, she knew the way that I was laying. My knees were buckled under me. I was hanging off the couch. She knew something was wrong. So she called, you know, the ambulance right away. And they got there very promptly based on what, you know, she told them. They thankfully took it very seriously and just got to our house like within minutes. I don't remember any of this, but this is just what my wife told me. And, you know, at first they thought maybe it was an overdose. Like they were like, the way that it looked like that, and I can see why, you know. But then when she kind of filled them in on my medical history, they were like, oh my gosh, okay, so this was probably a seizure. Right away they put me on oxygen and some antibiotics and some other things. And their first suspicion was that I had meningitis. So they gave me a spinal tap. Again, I don't remember any of this. I was unresponsive, unconscious for 24 hours at least after the seizure. Maybe more than that, depending on when the seizure happened. But I mean, so I don't, thank goodness I don't remember really any of this, but just more and more was kind of being uncovered as they ran tests and found out more about the rhabdo. And so, okay, this is what I was going to say. So my CK levels were 200,000. That is insane. Like, so it's already rare to develop rhabdomyolysis from a seizure. It's more common, like I said, with crush victims, people who sustain very traumatic bodily injuries, older folks that fall or have injuries, earthquake victims. Like, it's very rare to develop rhabdo from a seizure. Usually what happens is the seizure, it just goes so long unchecked and there's no care. The care is so delayed after the seizure for the victim that's when the muscles break down and the proteins leak into the bloodstream. So like that tells us that my seizure was very intense and prolonged, and my contortions and jerking and muscle contractions were so intense that like literally my muscles were attacking themselves. And in fact, I dislocated my shoulder during the seizure. And, you know, that was a test that we ran later on because I was complaining of shoulder pain. And so they did an MRI on my shoulder, and I dislocated it externally and relocated it during the seizure, and in the process tore some ligaments. I chipped my bone on the ball joint in my shoulder, which I'll need surgery later kind of down the road. My leg as well, I injured quite severely in my back during the seizure, just from the jerking movements were so, you know, intense that we think I pinched a nerve in my spine or around my hip. We're not really sure what's going on with my leg. We already went to an orthopedic surgeon, had them clear me, did an MRI to make sure I didn't tear anything in my knee. A lot of the pain is localized around my knee, but I also have numbness below the knee, then high sensitivity above the knee, so that kind of gives my neurologist some hints that it's nerve related, what's going on with my leg. I've been in a walker, using a walker for about 6 weeks, and it was really just last week that I started to slowly incorporate just walking without the walker, very short distances. So I've been able to walk, thankfully, praise God, like without the walker for the past few days, and we might continue to use a cane if I need to for extended walks. But my leg is getting stronger, my shoulder is getting stronger. I just finished up with my in-home physical therapy for the past 6 weeks. We're doing physical therapy, and so everything is improving. But we're still just so much in shock of what happened that night. And I was in the hospital for 8 days, I think. So because of the kidney failure and the liver failure, they immediately put me on fluids to try to flush out my kidneys from just the toxins that were basically shutting down my organs. Similar, like someone going septic. Your body is just basically shutting down, and so that's kind of what was happening. So, thankfully I didn't have to go on dialysis. My kidneys were able to kind of recover on their own during that week in the hospital with fluids alone and medication. So, I'm thankful it wasn't worse than what it was. I apologize, y'all. A lot of this is still very foggy and fuzzy for me. My memory has taken a hit, like pretty significantly. When I woke up after 24 hours, I wasn't able to speak. I was slurring my speech. I didn't know what year it was. I didn't know where I was. I was very confused when I woke up. And my wife was right beside me. And my sisters drove in from out of town. And they drove in to be by my side. And my mom drove in from out of state, and she was there, and my stepdad. They were obviously just really concerned, and the doctors were concerned that I wasn't waking up. It's very common in a post-ictal state after a seizure to be unconscious or just out of it for an hour or two. And so they were kind of preparing me to wake up and treat me from there, but I was unresponsive, like I said, for 24 hours. And that was really concerning to the ER doctors, which is why I was admitted to the neuro floor. And my wife was just obviously beside herself and hysterical, but also so strong, and was there by my side every single second. My kids had to see that. They had to see my body being carted off in the ambulance that morning. So we're still working through all of that, as you can imagine. And I just wanted to share, kind of where I feel Jesus is in all of this, where I know he is in all of this, and how he's been speaking to me and ministering to me. Specifically, I want to share an experience I had while I was unresponsive. So it's like I was unconscious, but really I was conscious. Let me explain. Because I do have very subtle dreamlike memories during or after the seizure. I even asked my wife, I said, when I was able to speak and kind of regain my speech and memory recall, I even asked my wife, I said, was I screaming? I remember screaming. She said, no, you weren't screaming at all. You were completely nonverbal. I was physically in a lot of unrest, to the point that they had to put me in restraints. So, like, the doctors and nurses could not get me to be still. Very common again, like I was being very combative, but like not on purpose. Like that's not me. That's not in my nature, but like I was being very combative to the point that they had to restrain my arms, my hands, my feet, which was just obviously so hard for my wife to watch. But they had to do it in order to get my IV. I was pulling my IVs out, and they couldn't get my MRI because I wouldn't sit still. But that tells me that I was suffering. Like I said, I remember screaming, but I wasn't audibly. It was all in my subconscious, and I just remember screaming in my body, and in being in so much pain and agony. I also remember my wife's voice. And guys, this is like just so emotional for me and touching. My wife, she was calling me, and I could remember her saying, Bryce, please come back. Please come back. Jesus, bring him back. I heard that, and it felt like I was underwater. I remember that feeling. It felt like I was underwater and I was sinking. And it was like I could hear my wife's voice, but it sounded so far away, and it was like muffled. And I could even see like the fluorescent lights of the hospital, but I would just sink deeper and deeper, and then it would like be black. And then I would come back up to the surface, and I could like hear my wife again, and I could just like feel her embrace. She was like holding me and touching my face, and it's just like very subtle memories and like impressions in my body that I just remember. And then we have pictures even of her holding me, and then I would sink back down into the depths, and I remember being in like a black abyss, and the pain would stop, and it was like I was in the eye of the hurricane. The storm around me ceased for a moment, and in that moment I was in just the dark black abyss of my subconscious, of my soul. I don't know, really. And I felt so alone in that moment. And in my subconscious, I knew that I was fighting for my life. But what I also felt at that same time, though I felt so alone, I also remember feeling like no other feeling I've had in my entire life. The presence of Jesus with me. I have a hard time putting into words what I felt. I didn't see Jesus, like I didn't see his face or anything like that. I just felt the presence of God so strongly in that moment. I knew he was there holding me, sustaining me. In the moment that I felt so alone. Hold on, guys. Guys, can Daddy just have my kids? You want to say hi? Okay, ready? Here we go. Here's Robin. Say, hey!
Hey!
Sorry, y'all. Okay. So, where was I? Yeah. Oh, man. Oh, I love him. So, in that moment, I felt so much peace and presence. I was so present in my body, in my soul. And, the verse from Psalms comes to me. What Jesus quoted on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus quoted that psalm, and listeners around him would have known exactly what he was saying, what psalm he was referring to. And it's a whole poem, it's a whole song of David that begins with that phrase, and then it ends with a victorious triumph of God never forsakes us, even when we perceive his absence. That's like just so what I felt, I think, in that experience. Though I perceived loneliness and absence, it was in that moment that, ironically, strangely, mysteriously, I tapped into this place of presence and experiencing the love of God, our Father, Mother of the cosmos, who came to dwell with us in the person of Jesus Christ. He was there. And I know he was. And that moment changed me forever. And I just know my life will never be the same after this whole experience. My wife and I were just talking. We just got some coffee and talking about kind of next steps for our life. What is God saying to us in this experience? Really for all of it, it's not just me, it's my wife and my kids, that we're all kind of working through this together and just trying to be faithful in our next steps and listening to Holy Spirit and where he's guiding us. And I feel so strongly that God has called me to enter into that space with people. That space, many times in tragedy, in crisis, in chaos, where there is this perceived absence and loneliness, as if God has forsaken us. I think that's so profound because Jesus experienced that, truly experienced that feeling, I believe, on the cross when he quoted that psalm. And I think what he was doing was he was experiencing that forsakenness on behalf of all of humanity, for us, as us, because he entered the deepest depths of our suffering and our pain, is how he healed us from the inside out. It was in his entering of our suffering that he healed us. I feel called to embody that in this life, to enter into suffering, crisis, and that perceiving of absence in people's lives that I've experienced, not just this time with the seizure, but really since I was young. As I said, I had a lot of just trauma as a child and had many times where I felt so alone. And I felt like I wasn't going to make it because I felt so alone. And suffering is kind of like an old friend for me. Like, pretty familiar with this kind of pain. And I think that's not that God caused or was the author of my pain or suffering, but he so redeems it. And I think as our story unfolds, he is writing something so beautiful with our story in my pain and suffering. And I'm so just embracing it this time and trying to be so attentive to what he's writing And so my next step, of course, continuing to recover from the seizure. I'm still in speech and cognitive therapy, continuing therapy in the healing journey, and I'm thinking through and have some ideas of ways I can be faithful to this calling of ministering to people in their darkness and suffering. I've always wanted to be a chaplain, like, not always, but I mean, since I met my wife, we met on a missions trip, and like I figured out like what chaplaincy was and how it's, like pastoral care for just the world outside of the walls of the church. Like, that has so been me, like that's been my heart since I was a child. And really just like when I found out that was like an actual thing people do, I've always just like wanted to do that. And I've wanted to travel and, you know, do missions work and volunteer work around the world and be that presence. I just know I'm supposed to be that presence for people. And, gosh, this video is getting long. Thank you all who have been there for me, for my wife and my kids, everyone who donated to us through the GoFundMe, and who has just cooked us meals and dropped by just to say hello, those who visited us in the hospital. Gosh, we've been so overwhelmed with love, literally from people all over the world. People we haven't even met. Communities praying for us, lifting us up in prayer, and just like people I don't even know, sending us money and cards and support as, I'm not working now, and I was, really the sole provider. And so we just needed this so bad. Like, this experience, as hard as it's been, it's just like, I know there's so much purpose in this, and y'all have played a part and a role in that, and thank you. And I want to talk to you more and be in touch. My wife and I have so much more to share, and thank you just 1,000 times, and bless you. And I love you all so much, and I think about you and pray for you, and I look forward to just keeping in touch and connecting with everyone. And thank you for watching this, guys. And love you all.